All right, welcome to the Voice of Gen Z. This is a podcast by Climbs. Climbs is a climate finance company and a behavior change company looking to accelerate our collective pathway to net zero carbon. And we hope to do that in this decade by working with consumer brands and enterprises and then reaching the people that give them patronage to be able to find sources of capital and then incentivizing that capital to actually flow towards climate solutions in India and globally, but particularly in India, so that we actually have a shot at a cleaner, safer, better, fairer future. And one of our lovely brand partners that chose to get on board this Gen Z journey with us at Climbs a couple of months ago is Tanvi, the co-founder at Tamarind Chutney. They're a sustainable fashion company, and it's a pleasure to have you today for episode number 1, Tanvi.
Hi, thanks Anirudh. Likewise, very happy and excited to be here.
Thanks a lot. So can we start with unpacking, how you and your words describe Tamarind Chutney? It's a sustainable fashion brand. That's the high level, identity you have taken on in the market. But let's actually unpack the core root of it. What's the DNA of Tamarind Chutney? Tell us the origin story. How did it come to be? How did you and Charanya find each other?
Sure. So I think Tamarind Chutney is a sustainable and ethical fashion brand. We aim to work with traditional Indian crafts and give them a modern twist, all while being mindful of our impact on the environment. And in terms of our origin story, so we started out in 2019. This was a part-time project for me and my co-founder Charanya. My personal and professional background is not in fashion and design. I worked in the development sector. I've studied economics and business. My co-founder Charanya has studied design, both textile and apparel design. So we have complementary skill sets. We're actually school friends. We apparently met on the first day while we were taking admission. Our mothers remember that, not us. But we actually became friends much later in high school. And over the years, while of course our professional paths took us in different directions, we stayed friends, and we would often talk about wanting to do something for Indian craft and heritage. I was interested in that from a development sector, sustainable livelihoods perspective, and Charanya was interested from a design perspective. So I remember on some trip in 2013, so almost 10 years ago, we were in Rishikesh. There was floods in Uttarakhand, so we were stuck actually. And one of the staff members at our hotel was like, "So aap desh ki vikas ke liye kya karna chahenge? What do you want to do for the development of India?" Completely out of the blue, he asked us that. And I remember we all of us, bunch of friends, were answering that question. And that was really the first time where Charanya and I were like, "Hey, we both have this common interest. Maybe at some point we should work together." And then of course we parked the idea. And then 6 years later, I was in business school exploring various ideas. I, by that time, knew that I was interested in social entrepreneurship. And Charanya also had worked for a couple of years. She was interested in working in the textile and craft space. And we had stayed friends, but we kind of connected professionally for the first time. And we're like, "Hey, let's try this out." And that's how Tamarind Chutney started.
Wow. So we've known a few of you guys for a couple of years now, and I actually started buying Tamarind Chutney clothes.
Yes.
It was maybe the first time as a gift, and then I think I bought a gift for someone else too. And I automatically just fell in love with the brand without even knowing it was a sustainable fashion brand. So I think it was an obvious choice to exercise to wear one of those shirts, and then realizing that it was actually a sustainable brand was just a bonus on top of that. Is that largely how you found your earliest adopters and your first users and your 1,000 true fans? Or tell us about your customer discovery.
Sure. So from the get-go, Charanya and I were very clear that we wanted to start a brand or run a company that was built on the tenets of responsible business. So sustainability, artisanal, ethical and transparent. And that's been part of our brand story from the beginning. So I would say that our first set of customers were people who found us because we were sustainable. I mean, people other than our friends and family, of course, but our first set of real customers were people who sought us out because they liked something about our values and our brand story. And then I think it was a bonus that we had a good product, and then they stayed, and then I think they gifted stuff to people like you, and then that's how our customer base expanded organically through word of mouth, especially in the first year and a half. And we were very clear that we wanted to have quality at the forefront along with our brand values. I think having worked in the non-profit space, having dealt with a lot of women-led cooperatives and just generally organizations that are doing really commendable work, there is still an attitude that I think pervades that, hey, this is a NGO product, handmade product, so whatever, deal with a little bit of imperfections, maybe deal with a little bit of delays. And I think we were very clear that while we, of course, don't want to run a sweatshop and we want to respect our artisans' time and process, we also wanted to provide a very high quality customer experience. So customers come, our first set of customers came for the values and stayed for the products. And I think now it's turning around. More people are coming for the products and then hopefully staying for the values, learning a little bit more about sustainability along the way.
Wow, I love that. So there are actually two sides of it. One, you can find it for the product and then stay for the values. You can actually come for the values and then stay for the product, right? And it's amazing if you have both those engines going on at the same time. And then they just they both move hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a brand that I particularly really admire, like Patagonia. Has always embraced that as a company, right? A sense of purpose toward the planet. And I think they had a very similar journey through their history too. People finding it for the product because the products were just the best, and then staying for the values, or actually coming in for the values and then staying for the product. So is there any company like that globally you have really found synergy with and you really emulate, you respect and admire, apart from obviously Tamarind Chutney it's a sum of many parts.
Yes.
It's a sum of your and Charanya's experiences and influences as you've been growing up. So what are some of the other companies you really admire?
Sure. So Patagonia, definitely one of them. I think you've covered a lot about why we admire them. Everlane is another company, relatively new, but they really pioneered transparency in their supply chain and also being very open about the kinds of materials they're using. So really respect that. I know they've come under the scanner in the last few years for not having a super diverse workforce and some questionable practices in the pandemic. So that's been disappointing. But before that even happened, they were definitely a source of inspiration. And I think here in India, Fab India, honestly, again, Fab India gets a lot of flack these days because it's scaled. There have been some issues maybe in quality. Some of the more handloom and artisan purists feel that they've really diverged from their mission. But, again, you can't take away from the fact that they really made the market for artisanal products, which are small batch, which are handmade, where sustainability is inherent to the processes. So those three companies, I would say, have been big influence. And then, of course, there are other brands that we keep looking at. Unfortunately, many of them are in Europe and the US. And that's not to say that Indians are not sustainable, but sustainable fashion in India is often very, very expensive and the market is nascent. Market is much bigger in the West, so it's easier to look at what they're doing.
And what do you think are the common values that bind these companies together? Because they were started by different people. They had different, origin stories, different origin years. And then they end up finding a common consumer base in some form or the other, right? People who care.
Yeah.
What makes these brands care? What's the common identifiers within them that you see?
Honestly, I think it's personal conviction of the founders and a passion for something that is beyond just building a business and beyond profit. Whether it's Fab India, the founder wasn't Indian, he was American, but he just really had this love for Indian crafts. Patagonia, the guy was a sports person, climber, athlete. Allbirds, also one of the newer ones. I think the person who founded it was a rugby player, a former sports person. So I think they've really experienced a need for the product they want to create, or they've experienced this gap, and therefore they're able to bring in this conviction to do the hard things, really. It's very easy to just fall back on, hey, I'm just going to source things the conventional way and I'm going to start up like that. And then later, maybe I'll get to sustainability when I've hit profitability or something. But honestly, that behavior change is very difficult in itself and often doesn't happen. So I'm really glad that these founders had this conviction to build something different from the start. And because I think all of them were really visionaries in their own way, they were able to sell their story, their product, and really inspire people to have faith in them. They all, brought these products when there wasn't a market for them.
Well, them overseas and Tamarind Chutney in India, of course.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it's a combination of planet, purpose, profit, right? I think if any one of those three are missing, you really can't build a company of the future.
Absolutely.
Right? If you have planet, purpose, then you're like you said, right? You're just a not-for-profit.
Yeah.
Which also has its role in society, very much so. But how much can it really scale? That end up being limiting factors. But if you have planet and profit, then it's a very different type of company. If you have purpose and profit with no planet, then it's a very different type of company. And the combination of all those three, the PPP, right, is actually where we think truly sustainable businesses for the future will be built. So, Tamarind Chutney for us, at least the clients, has been a really fantastic discovery, right? As a company that embraces PPP, and we call companies like that Generation C. And this is something that we kind of peel back the layers of often found in our own consumer, audience. That there are common identifiers between the people who truly care for sustainable practices and are the first adopters, right? Generation Climate. It's not Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. It could be anybody, anywhere. It's a psychography. It's really not an ethnography of like any one type of person. It's 5-year-olds, 35-year-olds, 85-year-olds, people who just care and people who actually want to do something, but are looking for, an easy place to start and just say, okay, in my normal life, can I try and exercise a more sustainable choice? So Gen C has become a very important part of the client's journey and experience, and we're discovering those folks all around the country. They're there. They're just waiting to be kind of found. So can you tell us about some of your like true fans, to give us an experience that somebody's written to you about, where they didn't know what Tamarind Chutney was, or they didn't really practice sustainable fashion, and then you took them through a transformation of a journey where now it's just become a default choice?
Because that's cheaper and it suits their business model. And a lot of people were really shocked, and a couple of people wrote back to us being like, hey, thanks so much for this. I didn't know this. I am now going to check with brands before I return and understand what they do. So something like that is behavior change that doesn't impact us. It doesn't change our processes, but is really encouraging to see consumers say, hey, I'm going to now go and do something else or ask another brand, which could possibly then change that brand's behavior at a larger scale. So those are honestly least impactful from a business metrics perspective, but most exciting for us from an impact perspective. And then I think similarly, we have customers who really appreciate our, what I call, thoughtful marketing tactics. I think, again, working in e-commerce, it's so tempting to constantly be like, hey, flash sale, buy this now, buy that now. And we have to try very hard to, when we keep reminding ourselves that, hey, that's not what we're here for. So, even when we do run discounts or give offers, we always say, hey, if you don't want to buy something now, but you want to avail the discount, here is, the link to our gift card. Buy a gift card on sale and then you can, use it later. And again, we give this tip to our customers that if you're not sure whether you want to buy something, keep it in your cart for 24 hours and then if you still want it, then buy it. And a lot of people have come back to us saying, I've done these things and it's really helpful. So I think in those ways, our consumers are very engaged with us. Again, brands that are not necessarily being very thoughtful about sustainability might hear this and be like, what is wrong with you? How can you tell a customer not to buy something and buy it for 24 hours, buy it after 24 hours? But honestly, that's why we're here. Like, being a sustainable fashion brand involves telling people to buy less and buy better. And we are here for that transformation, and our business model is built accordingly.
That's amazing. Telling a consumer to put it in their cart and hold on to it is actually, at least in the old status quo way of thinking, the fastest way to lose your consumer, right? Because most buying is still impulse buying. But you're so right. Like if you do that, you're actually in that journey with the consumer. You're saying, hey, I don't want to actually trick you into buying something. I want you to buy what you want to buy, right? And I'm here with you. I want you to think through this. If you really still care about it.
Yeah.
Great.
And it's tough, honestly. We scale slower. We have to hit a much wider customer base to get the volumes we want, because we still need to hit certain number of, sales to sustain our artisans and our team. But again, it would be very uninspiring for both me and Charanya and even our team, our ops team, if we suddenly change our values and be like, woo, we're just selling everything mindlessly.
But that's far more meaningful for sure. So a thought experiment. Tamarind Chutney is a small brand today with complete, and like blue sky to be a really, really large brand. And if you imagine a more sustainable future with sustainable fashion being a very core part of it, what changes between now and then? Let's say Tamarind Chutney has become and it's displaced fast fashion, right? And it is the large default fashion choice. What changes from now till then? By let's say 2030. So you have 8 years to do it.
Sure. In Tamarind Chutney or in the fashion industry?
Yeah, overall fashion industry, but Tamarind Chutney being a player to lead us there.
Sure. So honestly, I think the industry has to move away from this fast fashion model, and it's not going to happen overnight. By fast fashion model, I mean, employing a lot of people, making huge amounts of garments at like throwaway prices and selling some and then disposing the rest. There is absolutely no way to be sustainable if we follow that model, right? It doesn't matter how many sustainable materials you add into your supply chain. If you're going to be making if you're dropping like 1,000 new styles every day and giving your consumer this messaging that clothing is a disposable item, we are not going to be able to, stay within our carbon budget and just move to a more circular model. So I think fashion brands need to, in some ways, follow a few principles of what luxury brands have been doing. Of course, luxury brands have a way higher price point, but produce a little less. Clothing prices will go up a little bit, so consumers will have to be educated that, hey, instead of buying 10 things for $5 each, buy one thing for like $30. It's going to last you longer. So there has to be a change in terms of how you employ people, how much stuff you produce, how you market it, and alongside consumer behavior has to change. And honestly, I feel like consumer behavior really needs to drive this change. Fashion brands are not going to just get up and be like, hey, I'm going to make 1,000 styles instead of 5,000, and I'm going to sell it for 1,500 rupees instead of 800 rupees or 900 rupees. But if they hear more consumers demanding those kinds of options and alternatives, then I think brands will be willing to make that investment into completely shifting away from this overproduction and overconsumption model.
I love that piece about consumer behavior, because it's actually one of the strongest forces in the universe, I think. Gravity
and consumer behavior,
compound interest and consumer behavior, the strongest forces in the universe. It's actually really, really powerful. Like, you can move governments, you can move corporate interests, you can move anything with that.
Yeah.
But then it starts small and then it spirals, right? And you got to really get it to kind of compound.
Yeah.
So what are some really cool examples of consumer behavior that you have seen play out, in the last couple of years? Obviously, it's starting to happen on your own platform.
Yeah.
But what are your consumers demanding? This generation climate set of folks out there, right? What are they demanding? And you can possibly break it down into like a water component, waste component, materials component, carbon component, however you want, because there's so many different aspects of sustainability.
Sure. So I think it's very natural for consumers to start demanding things that are related to their environment and what they see. I think that happened with myself also when I became conscious of the environmental impact of my purchases. And I see that with Tamarind Chutney customers all the time. So they want sustainability in their lives. So for instance, they, they start with the end of the supply chain. If you look at it from a supply chain perspective, most of their demands are from the end of the supply chain, because that is what they have seen. They've seen deliveries, maybe they've seen a little bit of tailoring, but they've not seen anything before that, like that goes on before that. So most of the consumer demands are, hey, I don't want plastic packaging in this, or I'm so glad that you use your leftover fabrics to make scrunchies, or I'm so glad that the laptop sleeve has leftover fabrics instead of foam padding and all of that. And so these are the, like, I would say, small but very visible actions that our customers really appreciate. And similarly, in terms of the products they demand, tote bags, very popular. Customers love it when we share, or we ask them to share their sustainable habits from everyday life, like carrying their own coffee mug and all of that. So it's those sort of things that I think get maximum traction, and that's a great place to start. But I don't think it's the end point. And what our mission, at least on our marketing part of our marketing mission, other than selling clothes, is generating content that pushes customers' knowledge a little bit on aspects of the supply chain that are not that visible. So for instance, there was this viral video that a TED, some TEDx or TED had made around cotton t-shirt having 2000 liters of water being used to make a cotton t-shirt. So that is a very well-known fact amongst people who are really passionate about sustainable fashion, but not really among other people. So letting people know that, or letting people know that actually the biggest load, sustainability load of your garment is fabric before it even comes to us. And so the dyes you use, the kinds of materials you source, are really what matters from a reducing emissions perspective or being sustainable perspective. But that doesn't excite new customers or people who are just beginning their journeys into sustainability. And I think it's about getting them there and helping them understand that there's action that of course can be made at the very visible level, but then there's things you can demand that brands do behind the scenes, because that is really where the bulk of the pollution is happening.
And to get to just go deeper into this journey of the ops and the manufacturing processes themselves becoming more sustainable, it's never a solo journey, right? For sustainability, it actually is a collective action exercise. Mm-hmm. So who are some of the partners that you found along the way, specifically ops and manufacturing focused, or your processes focused, who have helped you get more sustainable practice embedded within the DNA of Tamarind Chutney?
Sure. So, honestly, like our customers, we also started from the back, like from the front end of the supply chain, because that's where we had more control. And so we, work with a tailoring unit, which is in Delhi. From the get-go, we were like, hey, we don't use polyester fabrics, or, which is petroleum-based. And please do not individually pack every item of ours in a plastic bag, which is the norm. We want it in big poly bags that we can reuse and all of that. And, initially, like, the vendors are like, why? This is so silly, and this is not the right way to do it. This is so, as they use the word gharelu, unprofessional. Why are you asking us to do this? But I think as we kept coming back with the same demands, they, got used to it. And now I think they even understand why. It's because we don't want to waste. And honestly, we were not ever preaching to them, because preaching really, I think, puts people off, because they get the impression that you are patronizing and you think you know more than them. So we never came and said, hey, we're a sustainable fashion company and all these things you're doing are unsustainable and this is the only way. We were like, hey, this is what we want and this is why we want it. Is it possible? I mean, from our vendors, we started off with like really simple things like plastic and all of that. And then as we moved back in the supply chain, we worked with all our artisans to be like, hey, okay, what fabric do you use? Is it possible to get unbleached fabric instead of certain fabric? What dye do you use? Is it possible to get a more natural version of this dye? What do you do with the water? All these questions we basically asked, and wherever it was viable for them to shift to a more sustainable practice, we sort of discussed that, figured out how practical it was, and then went with the suppliers that were most open to being sustainable. So, it for us, it was really important to never come from a position of power or, being patronizing. And often, like, people are really open. Initially they're like, nahi, we can't. This is not the way things work. But then when you tell them, hey, this is what I want, then they're quite responsive. Of course, we do face a lot of challenges. The biggest challenge is I think our small scale, a lot of times things that, suppliers that supply to exporters or basically do things at a big scale, they're not willing to work with small brands like us because it's not worth it for them. And again, from a business case, that's really understandable. So then we have to work around it. We ask somebody who knows somebody, and then we'd be like, hey, you made a big batch for this exporter, you have X amount of extra fabric, can we buy that off of you, and all of that. So that's sort of how we've been working around the challenges on sustainable sourcing. And of course, there are many things that we still haven't hit properly. So dyeing, I spoke a little bit about dyeing. We have some artisans that use natural dyes, which are much better for the environment, and the water that they use is also then reused. But many of our artisans and suppliers don't use natural dyes, and we can supply them with better dyes or waterless dyes, but it is like the cost goes 3x, and that's not viable for us yet. So we're still working on stuff like this, but essentially our mode of operation is to establish a relationship with a vendor or a partner, then do a little bit of a pilot in sustainability if we want them to change the behavior, like printing on a certain type of fabric or using a dye. And then once we've figured that process out, then we can scale it a little bit.
Very cool. It's a very cool look at the background, the invisible side of Tamarind Chutney.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot going on in the back end that we don't actually see. And then there's a bunch of stuff that we see on the front, like the dramatic photo shoots, the funny naming of the products, right? I love it. It's so engaging.
Hopefully.
So let's actually dive into that a little bit too. Now that we look at the invisible, let's look at the front facing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what's up with the dramatic photo shoots, and how do you guys put together how do you put it together? Tell us that process, right?
The dramatic photo shoots are actually very undramatic. It was born out of necessity in the pandemic. So since we started as a full-time brand, basically as the pandemic was starting, maybe, very imprudent decision, but here we are. We couldn't really do an official photo shoot because we were constantly in lockdown. And even if we were out of lockdown, we were so scared. It was like risking our lives. And we were being very, very conservative in terms of how we were spending money, because who knew when the next COVID wave would happen. So we were like, okay, we are girls, we are making women's wear, so we are going to model. And that's literally how Tanvi and Charanya, whose names very coincidentally matched the initials for Tamarind Chutney, became the models and the face of the brand. Totally not intended. And I think basically because neither of us are professional models, we are just ourselves, and what you see is what you get, which is somehow, again, people appreciate it. Often
Generation Climate loves it. Gen Z loves it. And then what about the extra creative naming also? Because I know there's a razzia, a cat collar or a dress.
We just got a little more fun with it. So because our common friend Lavanya modeled the sarees and her cat was there, we called it razzia. Or if there's a person associated with the garment through modeling or through their recommendation that, hey, you should make this product, we involve them. If there's a certain color or a certain mood, an occasion where the garment can be worn, we just go in that direction. Anything's game, honestly. If you have any name suggestions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But the reason I asked that was because I think it unpacks the authenticity of the brand too. Whether it's like with the photo shoots, whether it's with the naming, it's very unique. And it speaks to the DNA of the company of like authenticity is key. And I think that's a common trait with the audience as well, right? Like people who are choosing to care about being more sustainable and live more climate consciously. Like authenticity is a very core value to them in the brands that they buy from. You named a few earlier, right? Patagonia, Allbirds. What do they share with Tamarind Chutney? It's authenticity. There is no mass manufactured, just like stone cold, like no faces behind the scenes approach that can sync up with this audience out there, right? Because the reality is we can never really truly stop consuming. As a species, we're always going to be consuming, right? We can only choose to make more sustainable choices and then like cut what consumption we can, but buy from brands that live like us, right? Breathe like us. So I think authenticity over there really resonates right through. Would love to actually go into a few more specifics about the sustainable choices you also offer your
Yeah.
consumers, right? So why did you choose to partner with clients, and what does that mean? Like, what is carbon to Tamarind Chutney?
Sure.
Like, why do you guys, go down the journey of working with us?
Sure. I mean, I think you just talked about, how we can never stop consuming, but we can be more mindful. And I think that value is something, or, Climbs embodies that sort of statement or that value. And I think so does Tamarind Chutney. So whenever we're looking to partner with organizations that can help our consumers make more sustainable choices, shared values is a big one. And again, to be very honest, of course, carbon offsets is a solution that has been around for a while in the climate action space, and it had been on my mind to look into it. And we had somebody in our team also do some research, and really at that time we felt that the solutions that existed in the market were pretty unsatisfactory, and we were like, okay, we're not going to offer an offset solution because we don't want something that is opaque. We don't want something that people feel is scammy, because we are a brand that prides itself on its honesty and authenticity, and we want to partner with another organization that is similar. And so we were like, okay, park carbon offsets, we'll do other sustainable things. And then when I found out about Climbs, I was like, hey, okay, this checks all the boxes that were not being checked earlier. We really appreciate the transparency that Climbs brings in terms of, showing people the projects that their carbon credits are going to, allowing them to choose, which I think is really big. It helps people get involved, and also not positioning carbon offsets as the silver bullet. It's like super important. It draws people in. It helps offset stuff we can never stop doing. But Climbs, whatever marketing and whatever positioning I've seen of your team, you've never said, hey, this is it. Once you've done this, all your sustainability mandate is done. And I think that's a very big criticism of carbon offsets globally. And that's what's really, if there's anything that's given offsets a little bit of a bad name or a little bit of a prickly reputation, it's this, that people use carbon offsets as a free pass. And I think from the get-go, I noticed that Climbs was not that. And that's really what motivated us to want to partner with you guys. And again, frankly, when I found out about Climbs, I looked it up and then I didn't approach you guys. I was like, we're way too small. So I'm really glad that you guys approached us, because of course it's going to be a slow journey with a brand that starts small, but I'm hopeful that our customers are the customers that would be the early adopters and first movers, and can then spread the word about climate action through offsets.
And they definitely are. Like, we love finding with Gen Z folks within your audience too, who may have sustainable fashion as the first choice that they possibly made. It may not be. They may have 3 other sustainable choices too in their life. But if that's the first one, then for them to start with buying sustainable clothing, carbon neutralizing whatever residual emissions there are, and then actually discovering other sustainable solutions out there, and discovering, hey, what all is going on the ground in India, right? What's actually fighting the carbon problem? What sort of forestry projects are there? What sort of waste to energy projects are there? What sort of renewable energy projects are there? A lot of people don't even know that there are actually climate solutions all around us, right? And that power of like enablement is really something that we have chosen to, take the hard challenge of and make sustainability easy. So it only happens when we can partner with folks like you to make climate action really, really, really accessible, right? So that's about carbon specifically, but what about water and waste?
So from a water and waste, and you're asking in terms of partnerships, right?
Yeah, or what would you like to do?
Sure. Okay. So waste, I think, is something that we have more control over than water. So I think for waste, it's like we are trying to be zero waste as much as possible, right? So from the moment the fabric reaches us to, the moment it leaves our warehouse, it's like, no piece of fabric will go unused in our warehouse. And we sort of had our team internalize that. We haven't partnered with anybody in this respect, because honestly, it's not difficult to do things in waste. I think water is a lot more challenging because we don't use water. All the water is used in other aspects of the supply chain. So to be able to then, incentivize our partners to do things that are more difficult at a small scale is challenging. But we are essentially trying to establish a partnership with vendors of organic cotton. And here the background is that while cotton is a big water guzzler as a crop and subsequently as a fabric, while organic cotton doesn't use less water, but all the water that it uses can be reused. Whereas conventional cotton, the water is so polluted and there's so much chemicals that you can't really do anything about it. So I think we are trying to shift to organic cotton as much as possible while also sourcing in smaller quantities. So we found a couple of suppliers that are a little bit more open to us. And so we're figuring out what we can do. They're also, customers are used to a certain rate, and while of certain fabrics, so like a cotton t-shirt, if I suddenly start charging 800 rupees for a cotton t-shirt because it's organic, sales will drop. So there, we have to find a middle ground where we are like educating the consumer that this is like so much better in this way. Or, again, like I think I mentioned earlier, we sort of collaborate with a bunch of other brands and source together so we get a better rate and are able to share the savings with consumers. So water is really, really tough, honestly. And everything we do will have to be via partners. And that's a big, big challenge for us.
Tamarind Chutney was born as a brand with sustainability in its DNA right from day one, right? If there is another Tanvi and another Charanya just starting out right now, they're super excited about also getting into the fashion space and building a truly sustainable fashion brand. What would you tell them?
So, one, I would tell them to stick with each other, because having a co-founder with complementary skills is game-changing, because starting a company is difficult. It can get lonely. So having a partner that you trust in this journey is wonderful and necessary. I think in terms of the actual, running of the company, I would say it's okay to start small, focus on the small wins that will motivate you. And there are a lot of people that have done things before that may have failed, may be in a different, part of their journey, and they're very happy to talk to you. So don't ever hesitate. Like, I would be very happy to talk to somebody who's starting up right now, tell them what I've learned, the mistakes that, we've made and others should not make, and best practices that we've learned. And I think it's really easy to just get caught up in the weeds or feel like, hey, my work is not important enough and why should I disturb this person and that person? But people should go for it. And most people are happy to help and pay it forward.
And I hope this inspires a bunch more Tanvis and Chanayas to also start their journey and really become climate tech sustainability entrepreneurs, right? With that as a core value, building fashion products. I think you use that interesting flip earlier, right? Start with sustainability first and then design for the product. And that's actually becoming a very common DNA now. If we really want to solve climate change, we need to make sustainability the first, base level of the foundation, right? So that's your advice to the new entrepreneurs who are going to be starting out. What about to other brands? Not just in fashion, but in personal care, in transportation, in food, in any sort of consumption behavior we have. What would you tell brands that have not yet kickstarted their pathway to net zero carbon or net zero water, net zero waste? They just don't have sustainability on their mind yet, right? How do you influence them?
You see, that's like the biggest one of the biggest problems. And I think it's really important, this is not going to happen overnight, and it's not like somebody's going to wake up and say, hey, today I believe in sustainability. I think whoever's in charge in these various businesses needs to realize that their business is not going to survive if they do not bring sustainability to the core. One, because the consumers want it increasingly. So, it is also good for business, or it is like where the marketing and where your business strategy will take you. So that is number one. And I think that is the lowest hanging fruit. People listen, executives listen if they think the market demands it, right? But then secondly, also, I think it's just important, like brands need to realize that the climate crisis is real. I think because it's not staring them in the face like air pollution is in Delhi or something. Brands just end up not taking it seriously, or this is a problem we solve for later, this is not our responsibility. So I think some level of education needs to be done there. I'm not an expert in terms of what is the best way to go about it, but definitely I think it consumers need it, and the business needs it to survive. Otherwise we're it's just going to be a very, very different world that we can't even imagine. So I think from that perspective, all brands would of course need to be a little bit more accountable. I think a third thing that I would say is that once more governments get on board and once there's more government infrastructure, it will also be easier for brands to make sustainable choices, and hopefully that will happen in the next couple of years. There is now at least talk of a fund and more climate financing, so we'll see where that goes. But the reality is that businesses don't exist in vacuum, and a lot of these paradigm shifts have happened because of outside influences, whether it's political situation or financing and infrastructure, and that has to happen to also give businesses a push.
If you had to pick between 4 different sets of stakeholders, right? Consumers, brands or enterprises, governments or financial institutions, right? So these are the 4.
Yeah.
And give it an order of priority. Who's going to lead the charge? And who should lead the charge? Who is actually going to end up leading the charge?
Honestly, so I'm a strong believer in systemic change, and I'm a strong believer in things have to happen at the system level. We're not going to solve the climate crisis just by using paper straws. The act of using a paper straw is not going to solve the climate crisis. But
I fully agree.
Yeah.
What a scam.
Yeah. But the act of demanding more sustainable solutions is a signal to the systemic players that hey, we need to do this. So I feel like consumers are going to impact brands. Consumer demands will have to impact brands, so that's how it's going to work. And so in that way, it's a linchpin for the business side. On the government side also, honestly, it when voters, it's not consumers maybe in that side, it's voters, when voters demand certain things, will things get done at that level. And so again, I feel the individual is not going to solve climate action, but their voice can be very powerful and motivating the systemic players to move on this.
Wow, that is such a powerful thought. That consumers can demand better from the brands that they buy from. So the brands actually make that shift.
Yeah.
But then it's the public, not just with their buying choices, but their votes that influence policy toward enabling more of those buying choices. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think if you just think historically also, of course, technology has played a huge role in getting us where we are, but so many inflection points in history were because of protest and because of people coming together and hitting an inflection point. So I think we are nearing that inflection point just based on increased awareness, especially in Gen Z and Gen C, as we say, across all age categories. And I think that's what's really going to motivate bigger stakeholders to take action.
Amazing. Any parting thoughts for our generation climate, wherever they are?
I think I just want to say to everybody who cares about sustainability or is listening in because this is a topic that interests them, I want to say your voice matters. So thank you for caring, and I hope that whatever you feel motivated to do, whatever action that comes into your mind, small or big, because it does have an impact and it can lead to change at a higher and larger level.
Tanvi Bikchandani, thank you so much for being with us today. And to Charanya, who's not here, but your co-founder.
Always there in spirit.
Always there in spirit. But Tamarind Chutney, what a fantastic Gen Z partner for us. And we really hope to carry on having you as one of our warriors in this climate fight through the next couple of years too.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tanvi.